Hi everyone, Sonic Show Jaden here. And over the past couple years, a step in the right direction is a phrase many Sonic fans are instantly familiar with. Whether it be Frontiers, Superstars, or even Dream Team, most people aren't thinking, wow, these titles are perfect and flawless in every single way imaginable. And if you do think they're like literal perfection, you should probably try playing some other games. But they are all really good titles, at least in my opinion. And mostly all games I would consider a step in the right direction for Sonic. However, right now, it seems we need to assess and look at the more current state of Sonic because we just got 2 titles last year, both of which I like, but also were received fairly poorly by the community. And that's just the beginning. Despite there being 3 new unannounced games revealed and confirmed from super reliable source Midori, something so significant I've never seen it happen before in any leak, and never from a source as credible as this. But regardless of that part, there's still literally zero hype within the community about these titles. And I want to not only look into the reasons why this phenomenon is happening, and frankly going to continue to happen, but also what Sega can do to put us back in the 2022's step in the right direction. Or even for Sega to achieve their goals with their current strategy, where they want to recreate the 2000s era of having at least 2 or sometimes even more Sonic games released every single year, which they did so well to the point where in the 5-year period of 2005 to 2010, there were 16 individual Sonic games released. And no, this doesn't count the multiple system ports of the same game. Now that's 16 entirely separate titles. In fact, I bet you can't even accurately name all 16 right now. Comment them right now and try, and no cheating and Googling it. Although today, it's not all bad news and black pills, as there's some really good news I want to cover pertaining to the good majority of these titles getting ported to Steam and all consoles. And I'm not capping, I'm being so FRFR. And there's a decent amount of evidence for that too that I want to go over. So don't stress too much, it's not going to be all bad news, but a pretty important preface to tell you before going into these stories is that anyone who has some level of familiarity with my channel knows I'm neither one of those always positive vibes guys looking over most of the core flaws with any particular Sonic game. But at the same time, I'm also not one of these
super negative, mindlessly bashing and nitpicking every single aspect
type of people. Especially when I do personally think a lot of these Sonic games are historically actually quite good. But I do understand and empathize with you guys, as I too am a bit worried about this leaked lineup slate, which if done incorrectly, will be us entering the opposite of a second golden era, but rather will enter a second little dark age. While admittedly, I am generally positive when it comes to Sonic releases, as I've personally just liked almost all the games released in recent years, I do also have to add the super important addendum to that, which is I still also acknowledge their inherent flaws and issues too. Regardless, I preface with that little disclaimer because this video is very clearly going to be heading in a much different direction than normal, and as you can tell, it's clearly a more negative one. But the important thing to keep in mind with this is, it's not even my opinion that's negative, as much as it is all of you, and maybe not you watching this personally. But this is something I've been noticing very consistently within not just my own community, but also a ton of other creators and the broader Sonic community as a whole. We are about to get 4 new games releasing within 2024 and 2025, and yet nobody really cares about any of them outside Sonic X Shadow Generation, which with a Chow Guarding game, a sports game, a boost game, and a multiplayer party game, I mean, they're tackling every corner you can imagine. Another important note to this is, if you are confused and have no clue what the other 3 unannounced Sonic games releasing are,
like, what are you talking about, Jaden? What?
I recently made a video going over that super reliable verified leak from Midori, who again has an extremely great and reliable track record. And after Tails channel and a bunch of other sources have confirmed they've seen footage of this game, as well as Insider Gaming, to call this anything but confirmed is like delusional. Even in every video, I see a lot of people in my comments saying,
I'm not gonna believe a leak until someone at Sega officially comes out and confirms it.
Which, unless you're a child who has no history in this franchise at all, you should know that Sega has never confirmed a leak ever. Real, fake, doesn't matter. So if you want to wait for them to confirm it, that's fine, but I would not hold your breath. Anyways, I showcased and covered all 3 of these unannounced titles, and if you want to get some context on that, you can watch that here. But rather with today's video, I want to focus on what's separating these upcoming releases from the 2000s ones, as well as how Sega can reverse the direction and take all this negativity and bad PR, and with a few honestly really easy steps that they can do, legally and physically, that will make this a hugely positive situation for everyone, and will have all the reasonably angry fans turn to optimism and excitement for these games. Now, I am aware, and it's been confirmed a few times to me, that there's a good chunk of people at Sega that watch my videos, probably mostly just to keep an eye on me, but with that opportunity, I want to present how with just a few small changes to their upcoming game release strategies, this problem of mobile titles can not only be amended and fixed, but can also put us in an even greater golden era than ever before. You know what? Up the 2000s, this is better. And I really do think that by the end of this video, regardless if I do sometimes have takes you guys disagree with, and on a somewhat frequent basis, at least a vast majority of the community I know will be on my side and pitch for these exact same changes to Sega, which in the process would make these games more successful for not just them, but accessible to all of us as consumers too. And don't worry, I'm not being unrealistic. In fact, there's a very real middle ground that I think almost all of you are going to like. So try to give me a chance and hear me out until the end, because this is a really nuanced issue and overall situation we're dealing with here. But before we get into that, I couldn't make as many videos as I have been recently if it weren't for the financial backing from today's sponsor, Bomber Grounds. This game is essentially the Bomberman series from the 90s and 2000s, but completely upgraded and free to play, as well as including a Fall Guys style battle royale system where you have an enormous selection of really cute smug animal characters, to which you then, in that same Bomberman gameplay style, compete against other players and level up, with each character having a unique ability, which I do think is a great premise for a mobile game. And guess what? Don't want to play it on mobile? Well, it's out on Steam too, and also free there as well. In the 90s and 2000s, Bomberman was really successful because it was very simple and fun, but with its relevancy falling out, this seems like the perfect opportunity for a mobile game of the same format. I'm not gonna lie, it's pretty fire for a mobile game, and since it's free and supports me, it can't hurt to give it a shot and see if you like it. So download from specifically my link below, or use the QR code, as it really helps out the channel and helps me get more deals in the future, so you get more banger Sonic videos. A win-win for everyone. Thank you, Bomber Grounds. Now, back to the video. So, let's get into the main topic of the video. Now, as Sonic's fumbling to re-enter what's known as the golden era of Sonic games, which happened in the 2000s, as I mentioned earlier, there were so many released in such a short span of time, you have to wonder, how does that even happen? How do you just release 16 games in 5 years? As a Zoomer who is sucking on my thumb in that era, I can't possibly imagine so many Sonic titles coming out so quickly, and ones that are not only critically beloved, but loved by fans too. And well, there's a good answer for how they did it, and it's mostly the existence of these lower powered and smaller scale, really fun spin-off titles they released for the Game Boy and DS. Some being such big hits, they launched 2 different sub-franchises for Sonic, such as the Advanced and Rush games. And the sheer amount of games Sega was releasing allowed a lot of titles like Sonic Battle, that probably wouldn't stand on its own as not a true Sonic game, but is still a really fun and unique fighting game that to this day, I haven't seen anything that controls quite like this and has these camera and stage mechanics. In fact, all the sprites are technically 2D, but all the levels are 3D, which for the time on a Game Boy Advance was pretty cool. However, with times changing and markets growing, developments in technology have finally evolved far enough to have Nintendo make their next big handheld after the 3DS, quite literally big, as after that they announced and released the Switch, which was the first major portable console to exist, completely wiping out their own handheld space that existed there before. And while you've likely heard it, and many may acknowledge the Switch is far less powerful than any modern console, it still isn't nearly as underpowered as something like their previously most powerful handheld, the new 3DS XL, which got stomped into oblivion by the Switch. And that leads us to where we are right now. Sega is in the position once again to try and re-implement the same strategy of many more smaller spin-off games while still having them release on a consistent and somewhat regular basis, which one of these new spin-off games is even going to be a Chao Garden one, something there's been so much demand for. Yet no matter what tricks they pull, whether it's a smaller budget but fully 3D actual Sonic game just for mobile, the Sega, nothing seems to be working. And before too long, if that Chao Garden spin-off title fails, they're going to be put in a position to either hold off and focus less on these type of games, or the other scenario where they put their everything into it and they pull out the big boys, giving us fresh new Sonic Adventure related content. And you know when they pull that out, that's a last resort card. However, Sonic Dream Team and all these other games, while inaccessible, aren't bad games as a whole at all. No, the issue is not the game, but rather the device and subscription service you're forced to play it on. And if the issue at the core lies with the form factor of the game and isn't something indicative of the game's quality, then honestly, even a brand new adventure title would probably fail on mobile. Now, the reason we got to the situation we're at, with only getting mobile games and no longer these full, smaller budget spin-off titles, is that post-3DS era, there's an apparent and clear lack of any current portable handheld that's dominating or even existing within the handheld market. And no, before people comment it, the Switch is in an entirely different boat, because while some games have been turned down performance-wise across all systems, solely so the game runs similarly on the Switch to other consoles, making the port there not as noticeably worse, which if they didn't do that, would likely miss out on a big chunk of the Switch's audience, who's one of the biggest demographics of game purchasing consumers of any group. You Switch fans love paying full full price for your games. I'm not even dissing Nintendo fans by saying that, because they have a strong reputation and consistency that admittedly they have earned with an almost non-stop run of really good games. As much as I hate to admit it, Nintendo's flops aren't nearly as bad as Sega's flops. And first-party ones too. You're not going to hear Microsoft bragging about their first-party games. But to end talking about the Switch, as I promise, it is relevant. Even with it having less power than any of the current consoles, it's still far above and beyond the 3DS or even the Vita for that matter. So while in a technical sense, the Switch is technically a portable handheld, let's be completely real here. The Switch is far closer to a real gaming console than it is a Nintendo DS, and I think that's pretty objective at this point, especially games catalog-wise, since they get all the major console releases. Now, as I've stated, I have a solution for this conundrum Sega's found themselves in, and I think the Switch will be one of multiple big factors that tie directly into this solution. Now, as I mentioned, the Switch does have a lot of limitations, but if you look at it in retrospect, one of the things that made these 2000s and 2010 Sonic games so fun were the limitations they had to adhere to. And with these limitations, graphics and sound were naturally downgraded with the less powerful hardware, actually allowing Sega to make a lot more Sonic games and at a rapid rate never seen before. Which, also to add to that, despite all these titles being made so quickly and right next to one another, almost everyone regards these GBA and DS games as top-notch quality, unlike their 3D counterparts, which these ones were not full of bugs and glitches. I know, crazy. Now, while the DS and even 3DS were limited to, at its max, very low poly 3D environments and models, and that's only if they were to put 3D aspects in their game, which was generally pretty rare, and for most of that era, we just received 2D games with the occasional 3D one. And this is especially true in the Game Boy era, where almost every single game in the entire system's catalog is 2D. However, with hardware increasing and the demands for a portable game over time being closer and closer to an actual console title, you eventually get to the point where we are today, where there is no separation, and the same goes for the Steam Deck too. What we now view as a portable handheld has changed so much, considering that again, while the Switch isn't very powerful, it's still the most powerful mainline portable console. And no, I'm not counting the Steam Deck on that one, because that really is more of a portable PC than a console. However, to be positive, the Switch is still more powerful than an Xbox 360, so if Sega were to develop a title for the Switch, it would obviously have a lot more resources required and effort than almost anything would take to be made on the DS, and way more effort than the GBA. But now, it's time for solutions, as I feel we adequately covered the context and mini history lesson that will give not only a much clearer picture of what's going on here, but hopefully after that context you'll understand the stuff I'm about to say. So let's get into it. Fast forward to today. Sega's been growing very consistently these past few years through their numerous successful projects, especially with the insane uproar and popularity that both Yakuza and Persona have had these past few years. All of this allowing Sega to bring in and acquire a wide assortment of sister and daughter companies to help them with their sudden resurgence in popularity. They have a lot of talent to make these titles at a similar rapid rate to the quote-unquote golden era, as well as the countless teams willing and wanting to be contracted under Sega. Even more recently acquiring Rovio for an insane amount of money, a bit more than Playtika, who put out the offer to acquire Rovio first, in which Sega swooped in and literally saved the day. And at first I thought the Rovio was a bad purchase, but the more I've looked into it, man, I would way rather Sega have it than the other people. And this will affect this quote-unquote new golden era, but the entire gaming industry is in a kind of scary race to consolidate and acquire every developer out there. And this had been going on for a few years now, mostly from a handful of small companies like Tencent, Embracer Group, and Microsoft. However, Playtika, a company that almost exclusively made slot and poker games, offered $736 million. Where did they get that money? Stop asking questions, but the answer is me and your parents' taxes unfortunately go to them. But that's besides the point, and I don't want to trail off. Regardless, when it came to Rovio, Sega came out with the W, and yet another studio to add to its roster. And with literally zero of the 3 leaked mobile titles being spearheaded by Rovio, it's still too early to see what part they play in Sega's plan to be more consistent, but we do know they are going to play a part. And at this rate, we're going to be getting more Sonic games than Call of Duty, Madden, and Assassin's Creed combined. And for this exact same reason of Sega growing due to their success, we are now getting multiple Jet Set Radio and Crazy Taxi games, but also an awesome looking brand new Monkey Ball title and tons more, especially when you consider all the other super games they're working on. They now have development studios out the wazoo, and Sega's made it very clear they're going to make sure every team is busy doing something and pushing out some product. But maybe not Creative Assembly. Although if you are watching Sega, I literally feel like I could revive the Hyenas project. Get me in there. Now, even with all these huge new releases, potentially leading us into a second golden era, there's still one big problem standing in its way, and here I have the solution. So while the mobile platform has been improving, especially with the services that don't allow ads or microtransactions, so you can enjoy the games without being interrupted or held back because you didn't want to spend $1,000 real-world dollars on your dinky little app. And putting all the business model stuff of mobile games aside, even the mere ability to only play it on your phone, even if these weren't attached to any subscription model, would still be one of the least ideal ways to play this. Now, up until now, it's been a lot of history and negativity, but as I promised, here's where it gets good. So in recent years, even with the mobile game promoting this video, a lot of these types of games are now available on platforms like Steam, but you can get on Steam from my link below. I need the help, please. And the gaming community has been very vocal. They would by far rather play these games on a platform like Steam than have to pay for Apple Arcade and an Apple product to play it on. And while I am an optimist, I'm also never mind, that's cringe, I'm not saying the line. But since both Apple and Netflix are funding these titles, there is hope, as oftentimes, especially with the more significant titles, Apple Arcade will eventually remove them, not always, but sometimes, as most of them are just timed exclusivity contract, which when that ends, they either A, do what many others on Apple Arcade have done, and go to all platforms including Xbox, PlayStation, Steam, Switch, you name it, but no Android. Or B, the less likely scenario, but they could take the Platinum Games approach, which, in case you don't know, when their timed exclusivity contract ended for their game World of Demons, they just said fuck it and let it go to the void, mostly because it was very unpolished and from even looking at gameplay, seemed like a mini Diet Coke equivalent compared to a real 2-liter regular Coke. Regardless, they shut it down and decided it wasn't good enough for them to put up on standalone release anywhere, so they rather just decided to make it lost media. Something I definitely don't agree with either. But also, I can't imagine porting it to the regular App Store and adding a revenue stream model, as well as possibly putting it on Steam and all these other consoles would be way more effort than this game was worth. By the way, I'm not saying this is the worst game ever, it looks alright, but if you ever played a Platinum title, they're like way better than this. However, Sonic is not in the same boat as Platinum or even these other titles. Sonic as a franchise not only has a far bigger audience and demand, but even Dream Team, which people said is a okay, kinda hollow experience, still has a million times more game in it than a ton of these other ones. And to prove this point, just like how Sega sold Sonic Dash Plus to Apple Arcade and Sonic Dash Prime to Netflix's games, as well as also releasing a version on Amazon's App Store that also features no microtransactions, well, it's very clear to me, Sega is not opposed to double or even triple dipping. And something as big as Dream Team, which had Hardlight and a couple other studios work on, or the Chow Guardians game, or really any of the upcoming mobile titles, all have a very good chance of a port down the line, and even Sonic as a brand is historically no stranger to these exclusive deals. Even in the 2010s, Sega and Nintendo made a deal for exclusive releases, which the last game for them to have exclusively released was Lost World, and Sega knew this, so they intentionally made no core reliance on motion controls or any proprietary gameplay features solely with the intention to port it over later. And this has happened hundreds of times on Apple Arcade, and games will leave and go to all places like Steam, consoles, you name it. In fact, I went to the Apple Arcade wiki, and even the very first title I randomly clicked on reads, Assemble with Care was announced by Apple on September 16th, 2019 as an exclusive through Apple Arcade, and early access was provided from that day to select users. On the following September 19th, it became publicly available as a launch title that was included with subscription to Apple Arcade. It then became available for Windows PCs through Steam on March 26th, 2020, which, in case you're not good at math or forgot the first number, it's less than a year later. And I actually covered this in my previous video on Dream Team, the only video I've ever made on Dream Team. But Lego Brawls released on Apple Arcade and came to PlayStation, Xbox, Switch, PC, basically everything but Android. So the odds that Dream Team and other games like what's being reported as Sonic Toys Party will come over to Steam and other platforms is really high. I'll take those chances. Also, I don't know if this is a hot take, but Sonic Toys Party is a terrible name. I'm really hoping that's just an internal working name for now though. Now, since this is Sonic and he has a much more different demographic than a lot of these other games, I can totally also see it coming to Switch, which again, Lego Brawl came over, as well as a lot of their other formerly exclusive titles. It makes sense from both Apple's and the publisher's perspective why it's mutually beneficial to get this off of Apple Arcade and onto other actual gaming platforms. You have to remember, Apple is one of the few trillion-dollar companies. They didn't get to this position by being stupid. It's clear that Apple has been very intentional and clear with who their competitors are. They have been very lenient on any title that wants to go over to a console or PC, as it's a perfect opportunity for more players to get hooked on that game and like it so much they want that experience playable on a phone. Now, where Apple gets strategic from there is they do have one aside to this rule, and that's that almost none of these games have been ported over to Android. Steam, yeah, any video game console for sure. But Android? That's a huge no-no in Apple's eyes because unlike Nintendo or PlayStation, Android is directly competing for the same space in that phone market, and Apple exclusively wants the success of its platform. And frankly, they are not willing to risk the success of another's if it doesn't financially benefit them. Kind of like how Apple Music is on Android because they still get paid, as well as their app moved to iOS, as it's literally selling iPhones. That app is selling so many iPhones. And this could never happen the other way, as Apple would never allow Google to do anything like that, especially not anything that could result in Google taking some of Apple's user base. And they're so strict on that to the point where my AirPod Pros are missing so many features solely because I use a Samsung and a lot of the coolest stuff is locked behind iOS only. Even updating the headphone's own firmware requires an iPhone. So all that Apple talk to say, Steam and any gaming console are not viewed as competition by Apple in the same way Android is. And with how vocal the demand for these games to come to other platforms are, I'm certain it will happen. Some games come to PC and other consoles in less than a year from release, but some take multiple years. It all depends on their contract and if they have the capabilities or want to port these over for a cheaper budget title on Steam and console. That way, when these games are released on these more accessible devices and consoles that really anyone who's into gaming has at least one of and uses, then we're going to be in an era similar to the 2000s era of consistent smaller scale GBA and DS games, but now they're going to sound a lot better than the GBA's compression. And Steam and all the consoles would be the perfect place to sell a game like Dream Team for a pretty low price of $15 or $20 to own. And not just that one title, but a majority of these timed exclusives. Sonic is a series that's main sellers are on consoles, so trust me, I guarantee Sega is itching to get these guys on there just as much as you and I are. Trust me, these Sega guys, they like money. Now, best case scenario is it takes anywhere from a few months to come over to all systems, minus Android. But there's also the worst case scenario where some titles on Apple Arcade have taken up to 4 years, which is the longest gap I've seen between any Apple Arcade title releasing and then it coming to console and PC. So it really is a waiting game, but the hope is that it is a waiting game and not a but-if game. Now, it's nearly certain a good majority of these titles will come over. And I'm saying that one off of Apple Arcade's catalog, and two on Sega's persistence in being an actually good business brand right now. Wow. Based off previous Apple Arcade titles of this size, it is nearly certain a good majority of these titles will come over, but I do have to keep it completely real with you, and I haven't mentioned it for this exact reason, but I do have mixed thoughts on the odds of the soccer one coming through. I know, you probably forgot about the soccer game. I haven't mentioned it this whole video. Yeah, I think that one's just going to stay on phones. I'm sorry. But other than that one, I genuinely am, based on everything I've seen, fairly certain that you won't be forced to use Apple Arcade or Netflix to play all these games. In fact, the Netflix one you'll probably get day one because their DRM is apparently really easy to get through. And there's going to be like ripped APKs everywhere. Is it safe? No. Are people going to download it anyways? Yes. But regardless, I still think this is really good news. Also an interesting video. I got to talk about a lot of history stuff. It's almost like a video essay kinda. But I'll leave on a final message. Fear not, my fellow Spurgs, for we can all Spurg out on every system over our blue buddy soon enough. Anyways, like if you like, check out the sponsor. I actually have played it quite a bit and it's pretty good. And I'll see you all with another video soon. Bye bye. Bye bye. Peace. Bye bye.